Chapter 11 of the Bonnot Gang by Richard Perry. The Sûreté fights back. Around the hero, everything turns into tragedy. Friedrich Nietzsche. To catch an anarchist. After Chantelet, the gang split up but continued to stay in the Paris area, except for the tuberculous André Saudi, who sought refuge at Berck, a well-known seaside health resort. It was not foreseen that he would join up again with the gang. Eli Monnier went back to Ivory in his little room above Gauzy's shop, while the others booked into various hotels for a few nights, until they had found suitable safe houses. As for Garnier, the challenge contained in his letter suggested that he, at least, wished to carry on his intense living until death at the hands of the police. The gang had stopped using Rue Courtot after Bologna and Rodriguez arrests. Yet Godorowski apparently still stayed there until the 28th, after which he disappeared, never to be heard of again. There were rumors that he was hiding out amongst the highly cosmopolitan immigrant community in the Marais, which was full of revolutionary refugees, especially Russians, who would not betray a fellow rebel to the police. The sixth-floor garret in Rue Ordinaire had also been abandoned, 2 days before Chantelet. René and Anna had informed the concierge that they were going to the country for a few days, but they had not returned. In the meantime, Garnier had contacted another comrade, Millet, a friend of his syndicalist stepfather, with a view to organizing a safe house for himself, René Vallet, Anna Dondon, and his lover Marie, who was staying with his mother and was undoubtedly under strict surveillance. At the end of the week, Raymond Lascience found shelter again with the anarchist Pierre Jourdan and his girlfriend in Lower Montmartre, while Bonnot moved elusively every night from hotel to hotel. The illegalist problem from the security point of view was that they still had to rely on comrades, who were not known to the police as associates of the gang, and were therefore not necessarily 100% reliable. The huge reward on offer must have been tempting. It meant never having to work again for the rest of one's life. The gang had to hope that anarchist principles would triumph over the possibility of massive individual gain. Indeed, this was why Gouchard had ordered such widespread, almost random raids on anarchists throughout Paris and its environs. The Sûreté was driving home the message that the activities of the illegalists had made all anarchists suspect, and if they knew what was best for them, they would inform on these bandits, who, to quote Louis Jouin, were discrediting a great ideal. It was classic stick and carrot, hard cop, soft cop method, and this time it proved successful. Isolated amid the sand dunes on the beach at Berck stood Chalet Suzanne, the home of Barthélemy Baraille, an old railway worker. He had been sacked in the Great Strike of 1910 by the Compagnie du Nord, and now worked on the local tramway between Berck and Berck-Plage, the chalet being close to the terminus. He had long subscribed to l'Anarchie and was known locally as an anarchist, which meant he was also on the list of the Brigade des Anarchistes. It was here that André Saudi had come after the Chantelet job, although he intended to go and stay with another anarchist, Inger, in Amiens on Sunday. In the meantime, the sea air would be good for his health. One Saturday evening, Jouin, Inspector Colmar, 3 detectives, and a special commissioner left the Sûreté for an unknown destination, acting on information received. By sunrise, Chalet Suzanne was staked out by detectives. At 2 in the afternoon, they positively identified André Saudi, as he emerged from the chalet wearing an overcoat and sporting a jockey's cap, and walked towards Berck Station. He was jumped by the 5 detectives just after purchasing a ticket to Amiens, and handcuffed without resistance. On his person they found the now standard loaded Browning, 6 bullets, 1,000 francs in cash, and a phial of potassium cyanide. On the train to Paris, he consumptively smoked the few cigarettes they offered him, and doubtless reflected that he always had been unlucky. The last to join the gang and the first to get caught. After lengthy questioning, but little in the way of reply, André was taken to the prison of La Sante. An anonymous informer reportedly got 20,000 francs reward. Edward Carroy was perhaps the most elusive of all the illegalists. His whereabouts during the 3 months from 3rd January have never been discovered. Pierre Cardi and Arthur Mallet probably helped him at some point, but the latter had been denounced to the police and arrested. Carroy was about to discover just who that informer was. He cycled down to Lozère, which coincidentally was near where his sister was working as a waitress, to meet with a bookbinder, Victor Grangout, who had been involved on the fringes of l'Idée Libre and who had promised him shelter. Unknown to Carroy, the comrade disapproved strongly of illegalism. At 6 o'clock on the fine spring of April 3rd, Carroy walked to Lozère station, at Grangout's behest, but hardly had he got through the door than half a dozen plainclothes cops took him by surprise and wrestled him to the floor. From each pocket they pulled a loaded 9mm Browning semi-automatic, while in his jacket they found 150 francs in cash and a military service card in the name of Nicolas Passac. The score of travelers who were in the waiting room quickly realized that they were face to face with a bandit and began to attack him, but merely succeeded in striking the police instead. Joanne and Colmar forced a way through the mob, and eventually Carroy was bundled into a car and taken to the Sûreté. On the way he talked about his fear of prison, which he saw as a living death, and said that he would rather die than end his days there. He seemed cooperative during questioning, and Joanne realized that Carroy had had nothing to do with the crimes of the Bonnot gang, save interceding with Detweiler so that the Delaunay Belleville might be stored in his garage at Bobigny. Taken to cell number 1 in the conciergerie prison, the warders allowed his request that his handcuffs be taken off, only to see him make a sudden movement with his right hand. Before they could do anything, Carroy had stuffed some pills into his mouth, taken from a hidden pocket, made from the finger of a glove that he'd sewn into his trousers. But his attempt at suicide did not result in the kind of release he'd expected. The chemist had sold him ferrocyanide, an emetic, instead of the lethal potassium cyanide, with the result that he was violently sick and suffered from terrible stomach cramps. It was a cruel irony of fate for one of the illegalists who was serious about poisoning himself rather than face prison. Transferred to La Santa, warders were detailed to spend 24 hours a day at his side in order to prevent any further suicide attempts. The day after the Chantelet raid was Raymond's 22nd birthday, but he was hardly able to celebrate, despite the 7,000 francs in his pocket, which was his share of the loot. Still, by the end of the week he found refuge with Pierre Jourdan and his lover at number 48 in the Rue de la Tour d'Auvron on the 9th arrondissement. Pierre was a 25-year-old anarchist draft dodger and peddler, a native of Foix who also went under the name of Rossini, Cambron, and his case Clément, the maiden name of his lover, a married woman called Louise Marceline. It was a woman who now apparently betrayed Raymond to the police. By the end of the first week in April, the house was under observation by plainclothes detectives, disguised as workers. Pierre and Louise went out and did the shopping, which included a racing bike and a second 9mm Browning, while Raymond stayed indoors, paying for everything and planning his next move. At 7 o'clock one morning, Pierre came to the door and looked up and down the street. He saw only a couple of tramps and a worker. Then Raymond emerged, dressed as a cyclist, with a brand new bicycle which he pushed down to the Rue des Martyrs. As he disappeared round the corner, Pierre shut the door, unable to see what happened next. For just after he had turned that corner, the police ran up and punched Raymond to the ground and handcuffed him, despite the vigor with which he struggled, almost managing to seize one cop's revolver. A shopkeeper, witnessing the scene, dashed over, grabbed Raymond by the hair, and hit him in the face before he was restrained. Then the bandit was dragged to the local police station. Hidden in the lining of his cyclist breeches, they discovered 4,000 franc and 1,600 franc bills. In his pocket, 2 loaded Brownings and 15 loose bullets, and in the saddlebag of his bike, a further 95 bullets. Bouchard now personally supervised the raid on 48 Rue de la Tour d'Auvron, ordering his men to drag Louise out of bed without any attempt at observing normal bourgeois proprieties. She screamed as they did so. By the time Pierre and Louise were pushed out into the street, a crowd had gathered rapidly, shouting, "A mort, a mort!" But the police received most of the violent blows that were destined for Pierre. They were bundled into a waiting car and taken away to Quai de Orfrère. In the apartment, the police found 2 automatic pistols, 30 false keys, a diamond glass cutter, a hacksaw, metal piercer, pincers, a flashlight, a lead-filled coche, and 300 francs in cash, enough to suggest that he was a professional burglar. Questioned, Jourdan simply said that he couldn't refuse a comrade shelter, although he was unaware that he'd been involved in the bank holdup at Chantilly. Kalaman at first bloated to his captors. "My head's worth 100,000 francs, and yours just 7 centimes, the price of a bullet." Then he quieted down, except to make the periodic reply, "Je m'en fous. I don't give a fuck." Hide and seek. The police continued to decimate the anarchist individualist milieu. They now have most of the old Romainville colony behind bars, and most police trawling operations brought a few draft dodgers, deserters, or thieves to the surface. Most of these anarchists had something in their possession which could lay the basis for charges against them. Andre de Blasius had just been done for a typewriter stolen from a factory in Saint-Ouen. The Sûreté had a dozen places under continuous observation, including 6 Rue Courtot and 96 Rue Ordinaire. The raid on Rue Courtot came much too late, Godorowski having swept it clean of all possible clues. Knowing that the flat in Rue Ordinaire was rented until the 8th of April, the police hung around for 4 days, then raided it on the 9th. Inside there were 3 Winchester rifles and 2 Brownings, stolen from Smith & Wesson on 9th January, and a quantity of correspondence. The thing that worried the police was the whereabouts of the other 5 Winchesters. Millet, a.k.a. Couvent, a.k.a. Carré, a.k.a. Mathurin, was a long-standing comrade in the movement, an associate of Libertad's and known to Garnier's stepfather, Lescure. Octave now contacted him to arrange a safe house, which he did through his lover, Florence Triquet, who rented an apartment in the Avenue de Saint-Ouen, on the western edge of the 27th arrondissement. Garnier seemed determined to stay in this area, which was the old stomping ground of the Causière Populaire, and site of the working-class insurrection of 1871. The Rue de Chevalier de la Barre, Rue Courtot, Rue Ordinaire, and the Avenue de Saint-Ouen were all within 25 minutes walking distance of each other. The police were in no doubt as to who they were after now: Bonnot, Garnier, Monnier, and lastly Vallet. Of all the gang, the press were mostly sympathetic to René Vallet because he was from the good home, his father being a small manufacturer from the Boulevard de Port Royal, and he was seen as an intelligent, hard-working young man without a criminal record, who had fallen in with a bad crowd. The press were always more indulgent towards those from bourgeois or petty bourgeois backgrounds, while the bourgeoisie viewed even minor acts of resistance by the working class as more serious than greater crimes, in value terms, by members of their own class. On the other hand, the socialist supposition that all crime was reactionary, because it proceeded from a capitalist mentality, ignored the class question by opposing workers to criminals. The police, however, were none too happy with all the coverage being given to the bandits. After chatting to detectives about the affair, the Paris correspondent for the London Times sent in a report saying, "It is suggested that the present epidemic of crimes with violence may, perhaps, be in part due to the psychological effects of the wide publicity, which in an age of popular newspapers is inevitable, given to the picturesque but dastardly exploits of desperate bandits. The problem was that despite the press portraying the bandits in a spectacular way, somewhat divorced from reality, it might still inspire other desperate souls into copycat action." The police continued to be very cagey in their relations with the press. In the Avenue de Saint-Ouen, René and Octave scratched their newly sprouted beards and pored over the papers, taking cuttings of any stories about the gang, or more importantly, photographs of the opposition. Gouchard, Gilbert, and Joanne. Octave, however, was missing female company. Renee always had Anna, but Octave had not seen Marie since January, when she'd been temporarily arrested. He had toyed before with the idea of going to fetch her from his mother's house in the Rue de Laitière, but had decided it was too risky. He picked up a recent edition of L'Anarchie headlined, "The Bourgeoisie Have Got the Wind Up," and noted down the sentences which covered the front pages in bold type. Capital is nothing other than the proof of the stupidity and resignation of workers. If only they would reflect on it. The workers are the sheep, the cops are the sheepdogs, the bourgeoisie are the shepherds. If the people made use of their arms against those whom they had armed, war would be dead. The person who goes and votes so as to obtain good laws is similar to a child who goes to the wood to cut good canes to be spanked with. The elector resembles a peasant who gives a leg up to a thief, so that the latter may eat the fruit from his pear tree. Voters ask for the moon from the candidate who impresses them most with his promises of it. But when he is elected, he can only keep his promise by showing them his arse. Whether one prostitutes one's brains, one's hands, or one's womb, it is always prostitution and slavery. The value of money is fictitious and illusory. Work is the most valuable. Let us take our place. Develop your life in all directions, opposing to the fictitious riches of the capitalists, the real riches of the individual possessed of intelligence, energy, and strength. Then Garnier added a few lines of his own. If I became an anarchist, it's because I hated work, which is only a form of exploitation. Why kill workers? They are vile slaves, without whom there wouldn't be the bourgeoisie and the rich. It's in killing such contemptible slaves that slavery will be destroyed. It was obvious to Garnier that the climax of the struggle between himself and society was rapidly approaching. He resolved to take the risk and go and fetch Marie. Meanwhile, down in Ivory, Bonnot had changed places with Eli Monnier, who was now staying in a different hotel every night in his efforts to escape the attentions of the police. Bonnot was lodged in a little back room above Gauzy's second-hand clothes shop. By coincidence, it seems that Bonnot had also recently read through the April 4th edition of L'Anarchie, in which, in an article by Lionel, were also the lines, "If you apply your wicked laws, then too bad for you. Social violence legitimates the most bloody reprisals." And following on from the muffled voice of Browning's, you will hear another, more powerful voice, that of dynamite. So when Bonnot, like Garnier, was fired into writing a few last words, they too were reminiscent of lines from L'Anarchie, still their ideological mentor. But his thoughts were also turned to Judith, now in prison in Lyon, due in some measure to recent newspaper reports of the divorce obtained there by his first wife, Sophie, in which she had painted him in a very bad light. He began to write, "I am a famous man. My name is being trumpeted to the four corners of the globe. All those people who go through so much trouble to get others to talk about them, yet don't succeed, must be very jealous about the publicity that the press has given my humble self. I am not appreciated in this society. I have the right to live, and while your imbecilic criminal society tries to stop me, well, too bad for it, too bad for you." Then his thoughts turned to Judith. "I didn't ask for much. I walked with her by the light of the moon in the cemetery in Lyon. It was there that I found the happiness I'd dreamed about all my life, the happiness I'd always run after, and which was stolen from me each time. I am determined to take a lover. I believe it is useful to submit these few lines. For the 6 months that Petit Demange and M. and Madame Thollon had been detained. What is there against them? Nothing serious. Petit Demange was a business partner in the Rue de Vienne, nothing more. All the burglaries took place before his appearance in Lyon. The workshop's tools were transported about without his assistance. At Montgeron, I didn't intend to kill the driver, Mathieulet, but merely to take his car. Unfortunately, when we signaled him to stop, Mathieulet pointed a gun at us, and that finished him. I regretted Mathieulet's death because he was a prole like us, a slave of bourgeois society. It was his gesture that was fatal. Should I regret what I've done? Yes, perhaps, but I will carry on. Signing the bottom, Jules Bonnot, he folded up the 4 pieces of paper and slipped them into his pocket. Now it was only a question of time. Exit Joanne. Although Eli Monier wasn't spending more than 2 nights in the same hotel, he was taking an incredible risk meeting Lorelot and Jean Bellardi for dinner. They met in the Place du Châtelet and dined in a restaurant in the Boulevard de la Certe, under the eagle eyes of detectives detailed to follow Lorelot everywhere. At dawn on the morning of April 24th, Joanne Detective Inspector Colmar and 5 other detectives were ready and waiting outside the Hotel de la Lozère on the Boulevard de Ménilmontant. This time, rather than wait for their suspect to come out, they decided to shoulder the door and take him by surprise. They were fortunate in that, despite his desperate struggle, Monier was unable to reach 2 loaded Brownings on the table next to the bed. In his jacket there were a couple of 9mm magazines, a military service card in the name of Doats, an electoral card in the name of Brevet, and just 100 franc note. More importantly, though, there was some correspondence mentioning addresses in Ivry and Alfortville. Back to the Sûreté, Joanne called in Detective Sergeant Robert, who was designed to trying to trace the remaining stolen goods in the Thye case. They knew that Monier knew Caroy, and that both men knew Gauzy and Carty. The police suspected that the 2 second-hand shops might be fronts for receiving stolen goods. They decided to search both places right away, leaving their revolvers in their desks. As carrying weapons was only authorized when effecting an arrest, by 10 o'clock Joanne Colmar and Robert and a detective constable were at Pierre Carty's shop in Alfortville, only to be informed by Marie Collin that the proprietor was out visiting a friend. They got back in the car and crossed over the Seine to Ivry. Antoine Gauzy was somewhat relieved that Bonnot was leaving. As a precaution, he packed his wife and kids off to his brother-in-law's in Nimes for a week. Now he was able to pop out and telegraph his wife, "I'm alone. Come soon, Antoine." He expected her back the following day. When he got back to the shop, he found Pierre Carty waiting for him inside. They drew up a couple of chairs and began to chat. Upstairs, Gauzy had 2 rooms above the shop facing the street, while another tenant, a Madame Wenel, occupied the 2 small rooms at the end of the corridor overlooking the backyard. Gauzy's bedroom was a rather somber affair with the shutters closed, and simply furnished with 2 iron beds, a mirrored wardrobe, and a table. The floor he had covered with red tiles, reminiscent of his southern origins. Through a door at the back was the children's room with a cot and a bed, a chest of drawers, and a chair. On the mantelpiece stood 3 sepia-tinted photographs and some scattered Temple Nouveau pamphlets. A dusty shelf nearby was furnished with some rather tasteless knickknacks. The shutters were drawn here as well, but in the gloom could be seen a seated figure reading a recent edition of L'Anarchie, his yellow leather traveling case by his feet, and his gray overcoat thrown across the bed. Bonnot had not yet left. Gauzy's surprise at seeing 4 bowler-hatted gentlemen walk in through the back entrance to the shop was only countered by his immediate realization that they were police officers. Joanne introduced himself and his colleagues, said that he had a warrant to search the premises for stolen goods, and asked a few questions about Simontoff. Gauzy tried his best to field the questions and appear cooperative. "Was there anybody else here?" "No," said Gauzy. "He was alone. Except, of course, for Monsieur Carty, and he was expecting his wife back tomorrow." Telling the detective constable to remain with Carty, Joanne turned to Gauzy. "Let's go upstairs, then." The assistant chief of the Sûreté, soon to become the operational commander of the Brigade Criminelle, tried the handle of the bedroom door without success. Gauzy fumbled with the key and unlocked it, deferentially standing back for Joanne and Colmar to enter. Detective Sergeant Robert remained with him on the landing. Having been out in the daylight, the detective's eyes were not used to this sudden darkness, but a cursory glance did not reveal anything of particular interest, except another door. Bonnot jumped up in surprise that the door was flung open, and thrust his right hand in his pocket. In desperate search of the small caliber Bayard knew to be there, but immediately Joanne was on him. wrestling him to the ground in a life-or-death struggle. Bonnot's hand closed on the trigger and pulled 3 times, sending bullets pumping into Jouen's body. The third in his neck killed him outright. A fourth shot felled Inspector Colmar. Robert now rushed in to find 3 motionless bodies lying in a heap in the middle of the floor, the only sound being the groans of the wounded Colmar. He picked up his colleague and dragged him through the rooms and downstairs, intending to summon assistance. Despite the shock of what had just happened, Bonnot knew that there was no time to lose. He pushed himself out from under Jouen's corpse and staggered to his feet, gun in hand, blood flowing from his forearm, where a bullet had grazed him. Running out into the corridor, he came face to face with Madame Wenel, whose attention had been drawn by the noise of gunfire. "Shut up or I'll burn you," growled Bonnot as he pushed her inside and ran into the bedroom. "Give me a curtain." "Honest, I haven't got any," replied the terrified Madame Wenel. He opened the bedroom window, looked out, then leapt onto the shed roof, slid down the side into a neighboring courtyard, then over the fence into the back alley. As he ran off, a trail of blood followed after him.